Who would have thought that at a monastery in central Minnesota is the world's largest collection of photographs of manuscripts?
For 50 years, this underground library at St. John's Abbey has collected and cataloged historic Christian manuscripts. Father Columbus Stewart says it's part of a monastic tradition that dates back to the 6th century.
I'm a Benedictine monk. There's an impulse in Benedictines to exercise this role of cultural guardianship. And that's an impulse that continues even in the modern age.
Many of the texts were handwritten long before printing presses. Some, like this Quran, were created soon after. This one commissioned for study by some of the first Protestant scholars.
It's the first printed copy of the Quran. It was published in 1543 with a preface by Martin Luther.
Father Columbus says these ancient texts echo with relevance to our time.
Christians were dealing with Islam, and there was a real desire to understand it better. So the result was they wanted a translation of the Quran into Latin so that Christians could read it, but of course it wasn't for the sake of religious understanding, it was for the sake of refutation. This whole question of how Western, predominantly Christian countries dialogue with or relate to majority Muslim countries is something we've been talking about since 9/11. But what we forget is there's centuries of experience of Christians and Muslims, and in many of these areas, significant Jewish communities as well, living together. And it wasn't always easy. And these manuscripts tell the story of that. They tell the story of legal prescriptions which were made either to protect or to oppress a particular community.
Preserving that history is a matter of utmost importance to religion scholars like Father Columba.
If you believe that we can learn from the past of our own lives, the past of our families and our own nation or cultures, the only way the past has come down to us is in the form of these writings.
Ethiopian manuscript, Latin manuscript.
Impressive as the physical manuscripts are, this library's much larger collection consists of digital copies of sacred texts. Most of the originals remain in churches a world away from here.
Over 100,000 manuscripts from Europe, the Middle East, from Ethiopia, from India. Well over 40 million pages. We've lost count long ago.
The texts are recorded digitally, cataloged, and stored in underground vaults.
And our pledge is that those will be safe forever.
The library's effort began in the 1960s in Europe, a time when microfilm first became available, also a time when there was fear of a nuclear war. Next, the librarians went to Ethiopia, anticipating, correctly, that many of that country's Orthodox manuscripts could be destroyed in the political turmoil of the 70s and 80s. In recent years, the focus has been on the Middle East.
Our goal since 2003 was to do as many Eastern Christian manuscripts in the Middle East as possible, because we all know that these manuscripts are endangered from a variety of causes. The one people think of most is violence, because they associate this region, whether it's Lebanon or a place like Jerusalem, certainly a place like Iraq, with immediate physical danger to manuscripts.
We followed Father Columba to Jerusalem, a city fought over for centuries among Muslims, Jews, and Christians, also among Christians. These pilgrims were on their way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where they believe Christ was buried.
I'm going to show you a diagram of the Holy Sepulchre. All that's left now is really this area.
The building was destroyed by Muslim rulers and rebuilt in the 13th century by the Crusaders. It is one of Christianity's holiest sites, also a symbol of its divided family, something that complicates the task of tracking down and digitizing their sacred books.
So the Greeks have the central piece, the Armenians have quite a bit of the chapels surrounding the center, the Latins have the far side, the Syrians have a small chapel in the back, the Copts have a small chapel inside. So it's a little microcosm of all of the different religious traditions here in the Middle East. And unfortunately, relations are not always easy, because when you have all these different groups living in what is a fairly small building, they're fiercely protective of their rights.
Many regions where these traditions evolved, modern-day Turkey and Iraq, Armenia and Russia to the north, as far south as India, have seen war and upheaval through the ages. And just last October, a Syriac Orthodox church was bombed in Iraq. All this increases the urgency to record the texts that have survived, says Father Columba. He is particularly interested in digitizing the Syriac Church's collection in Jerusalem.
Barakmur. How are you?
Thank
Nice
you.
to see you.
It will take dogged diplomacy.
These Eastern Christian communities, many of which have been persecuted, massacres are within living memory. This stuff is really in their gut. And so you have to build a relationship where they understand that the motives that we bring to these projects is one of deep reverence.
The Minnesota Library also brings the money needed for such projects, several $100,000 each year, raised from various private donors. Local church staff are trained in the tasks, and while copies go to Minnesota, the local church retains copyright.
So if you have a monk or a layperson you think would be a good person to do this work, or two people?
Our monks always they will be with them.
Yeah.
This is a very, very old manuscript, perhaps 7th, 8th century.
It doesn't say.
It doesn't say.
It doesn't.
But it's very
It
old.
was written, but
In years ahead, Father Columba expects to return repeatedly to the Middle East until, as it were, the word is made safe.